Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining today's webinar on Super Hedge Funds presented by Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law. The program today is actually sponsored by the Parasol Foundation Trust International LL.M program. I see that some of the people who are registered for today's call are students already accepted or are applying to the program for the 2016-2017 year. We wanted to give you a taste of what the Faculty of Law can offer you. Today's webinar is lectured by Professor Sharon Hannes. Professor Hannes is a full professor of law here at Tel Aviv University, which is ranked the #1 law school in Israel, and we're thrilled to have Professor Hannes with us. Most of the time, Professor Hannes is in the United States, serving as a visiting professor at some of the best law schools in the U.S., including Georgetown University, Northwestern University, and Columbia University Schools of Law. As you are on today's webinar, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a red button that will connect you to the toggle menu. From there, you can view several handouts that we've already attached. One is the PowerPoint, which Professor Hannes will be using to talk about super hedge funds. The other is a short document about the Faculty of Law's LL.M program's requirements and concentrations. If you don't have a chance to look at them now, we will email them to you later. You have the chance to ask us questions. Professor Hannes, during the session, will review the questions you're asking and answer them in a timely manner. He's also agreed to answer questions after the webinar that you can send to us by email. That is studylaw@tau.ac.il. I'm happy to present to you Professor Sharon Hannes.
Hi everyone. We are going to speak today about hedge fund activism and about my current research about this topic. Hedge fund activism is perhaps the hottest topic in corporate law and corporate governance around the world. It's a phenomenon that started in the US and spills over towards the rest of the world. We'll see data later on. So let's start. I'm going to run for about 20, perhaps a bit longer, and feel free to ask clarification questions or questions at the end as you wish. Fine. So the first slide is about gigantic players that are in the marketplace. Those are not hedge funds. Those are called classic institutional shareholders. Those include mutual funds, insurers, pension funds. They hold shares in public companies in huge amounts, in trillions of dollars. In fact, they hold more than 50% of the market. They hold on average more than 50% of the shares of the largest companies in the US and elsewhere. But these shareholders, although they are gigantic, they do not manifest activism. They do not press on the management to change and correct their behavior when needed. And there are quite a few reasons that these major players are not that active in monitoring managers' behavior and in pressing them with so-called shareholders' activism. The main reason for lack of activism on behalf of these gigantic investors that actually hold our money, the public money, and invest that money in public companies is the so-called collective action problems. Institutional shareholders hold a lot of shares, but there are many bodies within these institutional investors, and each institutional investor sometimes or often hold only a few percentage in any company. It is not worthwhile for them to invest in activism while all the rest of the shareholders reap the benefits of activism. This is what we call the collective action problems. There are quite a few other problems, conflict of interests, a problematic fee structure. I'm not going to cover all of these points. We do see, however, that institutional shareholders are quite active when a third party causes them to become active. And the best example is the example that we are going to speak about today, which is hedge funds. So as I said, hedge fund activism is the hottest issue in corporate governance and corporate law today. Since 2006, at least 1 in every 6 large companies in the US was attacked by so-called hedge funds. And these investors, which are perhaps a new phenomenon, are active. So who are hedge funds? Hedge fund, from a legal standpoint, is a partnership or a firm, and they collect money from institutional investors such as pension funds and wealthy billionaire individuals, and they invest sometimes 5% or 10% of the stock of a large corporation, and even the largest companies are subject to these types of attacks. This includes Apple, Microsoft. No corporation is too large to be attacked by this type of activism. What do the hedge funds want as an activist investors? So they have a diverse set of goals. Sometimes they ask for massive dividends. This was the case of Apple. They convinced Apple to distribute tens of billions of dollars in dividends. Sometimes they want a spin-off, a partition of a major business unit. They sometimes want to change the board of directors or the CEO, the chief executive officer. And in some other cases, they simply want the company to be sold to a third party. So hedge funds do all that. This is what we call hedge fund activism. Let's scroll down. Okay. So the next slides show us some data. We can see that more than 50% of the activism cases happen in the US. This is where everything started. But this phenomenon started to spill over towards the rest of the world. And we have scores of cases in Japan, other places in East Asia, also Germany, France, and other countries have today activism of hedge funds. What do hedge funds do when they so-called engage in activism? Well, they are highly confrontational. They confront management. They are very modern in the way that they conduct this type of activism. They make extensive use of the media, public relations. They try to replace board members. They propose shareholders' proposals. They inflate their power by using stock loans and derivatives. And they do not hesitate to engage in litigation against the management or to present themselves as an intermediary, although they were not authorized to do so, and negotiate a possible sale of the company with a third party. The next slides show you an example of an activism case. This was run by a famous activist hedge fund by the name of Relational Investors. They actually teamed up with Calsters, which is a classic institutional investors, but this was probably an idea of relational investors. And what did they want? Well, they purchased a stake in Timken Corporation, which was it's a large US-based corporation that had 2 lines of businesses, steel and bearings. And the management of Timken was sure that there is synergy between steel and bearings, but the relational investor didn't see it as such, and actually wanted Timken Corporation to partition, to spin off the bearings business and to separate, and from then on to have only the steel business. And the management disapproved. They wanted to run the company, but the relational investors insisted, and they opened this website that this slide is taken from. It's called www.unlocktimken.com. The purpose of this website is to steer attention and to press on the management of the company to spin off the bearings business. And we can see in this slide, we can see the price of the stock of Timken Corporation. And what we see on the left-hand side is the rise in the price of the stock immediately on the day when it was announced that the relational investors purchased a stake in the company. And as long as relational investors continued to press on Timken, share prices continued to go up, and the relational investors promised or anticipated that share prices would go up to $70, almost $70, if they are successful in pressing the management of Timken to separate the bearings business. And what happened in fact? What happened in reality is that finally the board caved in and accepted the request to separate the bearings business, and on that day prices actually went up to $61. That means that relational investors and all the other investors in Timken did almost 100% on their value because of this battle. It doesn't always happen in this optimistic manner, but quite often hedge fund activism is successful in generating profits for the public investors. So this is a happy story. There is also some more general data, and there is a famous paper by Bebchuk and friends, and he shows that on average hedge funds actually improve long-term operating performance. So it's not only a single case. There are some other papers, and other papers are less optimistic. So the data by and large is mixed on this subject. So it seems that hedge funds are a successful phenomenon, but there are limitations. What I want to show you next, I'm going to tell you a fable. And then I want to convince you it's quite an obvious analogy to the case of hedge fund activism. But the point of this analogy or this fable is to convince you that hedge fund activism is far from a perfect mechanism. So this fable is about a condominium, and this condominium has a management company. So it's like a public corporation, and this management company is a failure. So this condominium is in need of repair, and it has some wealthy, unit holders. Those have chandeliers in their homes, but those wealthy owners, just like institutional investors, like pension funds, mutual funds, although they are wealthy, they have a collective action problem, and they cannot successfully press the management of the condominium to improve, to correct their behavior and improve the status of this condominium. So they have this collection action problem. And what do? Well, they look around, and in their neighborhoods they found this aggressive, obnoxious guy who is known to be tough. Let's call him El Capone. And what do they want from him? So first they loan him money. They finance the operations of this agent, just like institutional investors fund the operation of hedge funds. And then this guy, taking the money off the wealthy owners, he goes and buy a few apartments in that building, just like hedge funds buys a stake in the public corporation with the money given to them by institutional investors. And once this tough guy is owner of certain units in this company, in this condominium, then El Capone is able to press on the management, and the building is indeed improved. Well, then El Capone wants to make a profit from his achievement. He sells the units back to the wealthy owners. Okay? And now the building, it goes away with piles of money, billions of dollars in the case of hedge funds. And then, we think that everyone is happy, the building is indeed improved, but it's imperfect. And this is a puzzle. How come the building is imperfect? Because the wealthy owners are the ones that financed this El Capone, and they presumably were able to monitor his operations. How come the building is imperfect? And then we find out that the story is a bit different than I told you so far. The ones who financed Al Capone were not the rich owners of the units in this certain condominium, but actually owners of units of other condominiums. So they don't care about the long-term status of this building. They are only interested in short-term profits. And in analogy, the ones that finance the operations of the hedge funds are not owners of shares in the public corporations that is target to activism. They are owners of shares in other corporations, not necessarily in this certain company. And they don't care. They care about short-term profit. They don't care about the long-term well-being of the company. So I think from a theoretical point, and the data also points to that, is that hedge fund activism is a phenomenon that has some promise, but it doesn't seem like a perfect mechanism. To sum up, what are the limitations of hedge fund activism as we know it today? So first, there is huge transaction cost. We saw that Al Capone must raise funds, and then must purchase units, and then sell units. All that occurs in reality in the case of hedge funds. Hedge funds are outsiders. They need to raise money. They purchase stakes. They improve the company, and then they sell the stake. So the direct cost of activism is only a part of the huge cost that is involved in this transaction. While we remember that the institutional shareholders already own most of the shares of this company. The second problem, which is perhaps the major problem, is incentives. Because this agent, hedge funds are distant agents, they are funded by institutional shareholders of different companies. There is no one that is an owner of this specific company that cares about the behavior of hedge funds in a long-term perspective. So this is an incentive problem. And there are a few other problems in this mechanism. Okay, so far I showed you, in a glance, we saw what hedge fund activism is and how it operates today, and what are the limitations of this mechanism. What I want to show you next is science fiction. I'm going to, just for a few moments, I want to try to imagine a new mechanism that could improve the current behavior of hedge fund activism. So this is going to be a framework that currently does not exist in the market, but may perhaps improve activism as we know it so far. And if I had, 2 more hours to talk about it, I could tell you what are the limitations of this new proposal. But let's try to draw the basic lines of this proposal. So the first thing we need an institution or an organization that has good connections with many institutional investors. And there are quite few such organizations in the market. One of them is called ISS. It's an advisor to institutional shareholders. So ISS knows a lot of institutional investors, and I want ISS or another organization to do the following. First, I want it to kickstart this idea, and what they need to do is to select a group of experts to any field, any market segment. So, and that group of experts, let's call such group a task force. So there will be a task force for utilities, and a task force for media, and a task force for aviation, and that would be their specialty. Those will be guys that could run hedge funds today, but I'm trying to do something else. So we'll have this task force, and then ISS will draft a standard agreement. I will show you momentarily what I have in mind. And that standard agreement would be signed with between as many possible institutional investors and each of the task force. So there will be some sort of an agreement between institutional investors, as many as ISS can bring to the table, and any task force. This is also in a way similar to the agreements that exist today between hedge funds and their investors, which are institutional shareholders. Finally, the last thing that ISS has to do is to solicit, as I said, as many institutional investors to join this mechanism. And now let's see what the standard agreement that I have in mind. What would be the properties of this standard agreement? This is going to be a magic agreement. This is going to improve hedge fund activism. This is going to be a very simple agreement. At least the basic properties are going to be very simple. So we need two-tier funding. First, there is going to be a very minimal funding just to allow these task forces to exist in the market and to search for a target for activism. So this is like a search period, and this will be a very insignificant amount for institutional shareholders. They will simply, all institutional shareholders who sign this agreement would have to pay something, a subscription fee to the task force just to allow this task force to exist. The second tier of funding is the substantial one. Once the task force identifies a target for activism, a public company that the task force thinks is worthy of an attack, of an activism, then the task force will need much more funding. Those will be the funding needed to run an activist campaign on the company that they decide to attack. They don't need to purchase shares of this company, but the cost of activism are substantial. And then they will have a right, a capital call, to ask for an additional funding. But the most important thing is that that funding would not come from all institutional investors that signed the standard agreement, but only from the institutional shareholders, only from the institutional shareholders who happen to be shareholders of the company that the task force decides to attack. So the task force would decide to attack Google, let's say. They will open the shareholders list, and they would find out that 20 institutional shareholders who signed the standard agreement are also shareholders of Google. They will raise a call and say, remember, we have a capital call right. Please give us funding pro rata to your holdings in this company. Please give us this money, and we will run an activism campaign on this target. Why is it so important that funding would come only from the shareholders, the institutional shareholders who own shares in this company? Because this is what creates the direct link between the existing shareholders of the company, the long-term institutional shareholders of this company, and the task force. The task force knows that in order to please these shareholders, they cannot think only about the short run, but if they want to be a long-term player in this market and to get more funding for the next period, perhaps, they must please these clients who fund their operation. And this is a link that does not exist today in the case of hedge funds. So this is second step, funding. Finally, there will also be a renewal period. So after a few years, the task force would have to go back to institutional investors, ask for more money, or a renewal of the period. And this also creates an incentive for the task force to please the long-term shareholders of the target. Also, there should be some minimal holding requirement. The task force can engage a target only if they find out that enough institutional shareholders who signed the agreement are also shareholders of this company, so they would not have to invest so much if there are only few of them holding shares in the company. Last slide. What did I achieve, or what could be achieved by such a structure? So first, let's compare this type of new activism to the old hedge fund activism that I started to tell you about in the beginning of this lecture. So first, we have minimal transaction costs. The task force doesn't have to buy shares of this target because institutional shareholders already own shares in this target. The only thing that the task force does is to steer attention, to press on the management, and to advise the shareholders that already own shares in the company to select a new board, to remove the CEO, or whatever they want. So there are minimal transaction costs. There are only activism costs. No one has to raise financing, large amount of financing, no in and out market transactions like the case of Al Capone or the hedge funds. So minimal costs. Secondly, and importantly, the incentives are closely linked to the long-term shareholders of the specific target. Unlike hedge funds that are funded by certain investors, the task force is funded by the institutional shareholders of the specific target they attack, and therefore the incentives are much more closely linked to what we want to achieve. All activism gains remain with the existing owners, no wealthy billionaires that are involved in this story. And my mechanism is, or this new mechanism, is extremely powerful and highly available. Hedge fund activism is based on the pool of funds that are in the hands of, currently in the hands of hedge funds. This is around $200 billion. A lot of money, but still a $1 million drop in the ocean. Institutional shareholders actually, and this is the basic theme of this mechanism, institutional investors already own the store. They have more than 50% of the shares in the market. They simply have to manifest their power. And these task forces, these small groups that would rotate in the market, could help them do so. Thank you very much. I will welcome any comment. You can either ask me now, or you can write me an email. I will be happy to answer. So let's wait a minute and see if we have any questions. An excellent question. So this is a political economy question. The question is, how do various governments respond to this phenomenon? So I guess the question is about hedge fund activism, and not the new sort of activism that I support and doesn't exist yet. So hedge fund activism is a phenomenon that puts a lot of stress on managements of large companies. And because managements are powerful, they can ask politicians to come and help them. So this is a relatively new phenomenon, but I and others expect a huge backlash. We expect that politicians would help managements guard against this new threat that they are subject to. We don't really see such a behavior yet, but my expectation is that it would be pending. Another question that we have is, are there any legal boundaries? One of the major advantages of the current hedge fund activism is that there are hardly no legal barriers. Hedge funds collect their money not from the public, but they collect it from, or they raise their financing from institutional shareholders or from wealthy billionaires. This is not subject to a prospectus requirement. This is hardly subject to any monitoring, and then they manifest activism. So one of the main advantages of this current wave of hedge fund activism is that it is hardly monitored. What about my new proposal? Well, this is a good question. If under my proposed scheme, the meaning would be that there would be more regulation, this could be a big problem. And for instance, if the task force is so powerful, how can it become so powerful? Well, perhaps the task force could ask in the standard agreement, the task force could ask for a proxy from institutional investors to vote their shares of the institutional investors against management. If the task force is so powerful and asks for such a proxy, it creates a problem. Why? Because under US law, if a group of shareholders cooperate and grant a proxy to a third party, then they become a group. Once they become a group, well, they will have to report together, and there will be barriers to their operation. So we should be very careful in crafting this new mechanism as to not create such a group, and therefore no such proxy should be allowed. Okay, we have some questions, very important questions, how to apply to the LLM program, and the staff would answer later on. Let's take another question about the lecture. Are there industries which are more likely to see this than other fields? Another good question. So there are certain fields in which I think we can make an analogy here. There are certain market segments that are prone to a takeover threat, and the same industries are more prone to a threat of hedge funds. To the contrary, there are some market segments that hostile takeover is very difficult, and there would be harder also to manifest hedge fund activism. The best example is utilities. Utilities or banking are industries that are highly regulated. Once the industry is regulated, it is harder to remove the management, because you need to get some permissions to take control over these companies, and therefore there are some industries that are naturally more protected, or not naturally, but by regulation are more protected than others. Thank you very much, and feel free to ask any additional questions. I will answer them. Thank you.
There's a great question here about how to, in fact, apply to the LLM program. It sounds like we got this question from two of our participants, so we'll answer that. To begin with, you must have already completed your first degree in law. So if you're from the United States, you already have your JD degree. If you're from everywhere else in the world, essentially, you have your LLB degree, your first degree in law. If you're in your final year of your LLB, you are encouraged to apply to the program, providing that you're going to finish your LLB degree before the LLM begins in September 2016. I will send you all the link on how to apply to the program, but you'll have to submit your diploma and transcripts. If your law school provides a ranking, if you're ranked in your class, we will also ask you to send us an official letter that confirms your rank in your LLB class. You will send your CV or your resume, 2 letters of recommendation, be they from law professors or legal employment supervisors, or 1 from each, or 2 from a professor, or 2 from legal employment supervisors. Students who studied in countries where English is not the primary language will have to submit a TOEFL or IELTS score, and you'll have to complete an online profile, a few questions related to the program. We are accepting applications already. The application deadline is March 15th, a little over for a month from now. I want to let you know that we do have a number of students that have already applied and have been accepted to the program. So if you are interested, we encourage you to apply as soon as you can to hold your place in the class. In addition to applying to the program, there are questions about scholarships. The tuition for the program, the academic tuition is $20,000 US. This covers all of your study materials, covers health insurance, access to libraries, fees, and a number of social events and field trips. It does not cover housing or meals or transportation to and within Israel. That being said, there is a number of ways where you can find funding for the program. Number 1, our own program offers merit-based and need-based scholarships. Merit-based scholarships don't need to be applied for. We will consider you for that scholarship based solely on the strength of your application. Beyond that, accepted students can apply for need-based aid. This is determined based solely on your financial history. I can send you documents to apply for such scholarship after this call if you're interested in this. You'll have to complete a financial history form, sign a letter that declares that the information you're providing is correct, and you'll send us the last 3 months of your bank statements showing us that, in fact, the $20,000 tuition is expensive. Second, outside of the program, there are a number of organizations and institutional offices that will help you support your studies here. You should know if you are American, you can apply for a federal loan in the United States. That will cover your studies here at Tel Aviv University. Beyond that, Masa Israel Journey will cover a certain percentage of your tuition. You'll have to check with Masa to check your eligibility. For students who are considering moving to Israel and making Aliyah, the Student Authority with the government of Israel will also help fund some of your studies. You'll check with those institutions to determine your eligibility. And while the deadline has already passed, I encourage you to check with the Israeli embassy in your home country for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs scholarship. It is a very competitive grant that is granted annually to 60 students who will study in a master's program somewhere in Israel at one of our many universities. I'm happy to report that 2 or 3 students who have joined our program in the past have received the scholarship. The official deadline was November 2015, but as you'll learn if you come to Israel, you'll see that everything is a bit negotiable. So we encourage you to reach out to your Israeli embassy and ask if you can still apply for that. We'll also direct you to other sources of funding. We will do our best to make this program accessible to you. If you're a great student and you really want to study with us, if you want to study at the best law school in Israel, in a great city, in a great country, we're going to do our best to make the finances not be the obstacle for you to come study with us. If there's any other questions, we'll take them now. If not, certainly email us, studylaw@tau.ac.il, whether it's about the program, whether it's about the presentation today, or any questions you might have about Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law. If there's any further questions, we'll take them now. If not, we will thank you for joining us. I want you to know that there's people on this call from around the world. If you join us at TAU Law, your classes will be very similar. You will have students in your classes from countries very diverse from yours, students from common law and civil law countries, from the North America, South America, Asia, Europe, really from all over. There's a question, do I apply online or do I have to send everything by post? Everything can be done online. We will save you using the Israeli postal system, which sometimes leaves a bit to be desired. We'll send you all of the documents, all of the links, everything you need to know how to apply. The LL.M contact is myself. My name is Jessica Ben-Nun, and my colleague is here, Taryn Back. One of us will answer your emails. The academic director of the program is Professor Michael Bernhack, who will also answer any academic-related questions you might have. If that's all, we thank you for joining us. We hope you have a great day.